Good afternoon, everyone. I hope we had enough to eat. It's a Methodist potluck, so I'm sure we did. Greetings to all of you in person and to those watching online. We welcome you to Eden Prairie United Methodist Church. I'm Don Presley. I'm a member of the leadership team for MRC, and it's good to have all of you here, and I'm glad you have chosen to be here. There are a lot of other things we could be doing today. And we're just so happy to have you here. So, oh yes, don't forget your food when you leave. My wife Karen said, tell them to get their food picked up. So I've done that part. All right. Some announcements that we have, just to bring you up to date on MRC. The Reconciling Ministries Network, RMN Convocation, is coming in July in Madison, Wisconsin. And if you want to be a part of that, you can view it on the RMN website. And I want to read you their statement. The Spirit is, don't turn on me. The Spirit is calling us into uncharted waters is the title. This July, come to beautiful Madison, Wisconsin to refresh your soul, enlarge your capacity, and find your travelers on this justice journey. Just in time, RMN is poised to create a different, stronger movement in this era of our church and of our world. So you can go to the RMN website and find out more details on that. Twin City Pride is coming up at the end of June, as it does every year, and we are back in there again with a booth. I tell you, I put the application in. I think I heard back in about 4 days. They just said, yep, you're in. So I want to say, too, for anybody that was at the booth last year, we have a much more user-friendly booth. It's on a flat area. Last year was kind of dicey. It's on a flat area. We're on one of the circles, so we should see a lot of traffic and give away a lot of our rainbow medallions again. We have, for those viewing online, if you're an individual, we'd like you to tell us who and from where you are viewing. And if you're in a watch party, we would like the group name and where you are located and the number so that we can get a good count on who is participating today. There will be a free will offering as you leave. There are baskets at both exit doors, and we would love to have you help out the ministry. And also the magnet ministry table with Tammy V is out in the narthex, and if you've seen them, they're the Pride magnets in the shape of the state of Minnesota. There are also refrigerator magnets for the folks in the Ukraine. And so if you're so moved or want to get more information, you can speak with Tammy, and your congregation can participate in that. I think that's what I have. I would like to introduce both together Reverend Carol Zaagsma and Becky Boland from the annual conference, or from the annual conference. They will be coming to share their presentations, and I will get started with Pastor Carol Zaagsma.
Thank you, Don, and thank you all for being here and for the fine hospitality we've all experienced as we arrived today. So my name is Carol Zaagsma, and I am an ordained elder in the Minnesota Conference. My pronouns are she and her, and I was elected as the clergy delegate from Minnesota to the 2020 General Conference. It was held in Charlotte, North Carolina in 2024, after a couple of pandemic delays. feel like I've been on the delegation for a decade, because I probably have. So I want to thank you for the invitation to come and speak today. The 2020-2024 General Conference was groundbreaking in so very many ways. It marks what I hope might be understood as a turning point in the United Methodist Church. So it was a privilege to be part of the history made at the 2020-2024 General Conference. And it's a pleasure now to be with you to talk a little bit about it, while also offering some information about what remains to be done in terms of ratifying the constitutional amendments that were passed last May. I've asked Walker Bro to share a couple of key pieces in this presentation, so we will be hearing from him as well, as he is here today in his many roles, but he'll be speaking in part of my time in his role as conference secretary, as well as a North Central jurisdiction representative on the General Commission on Religion and Race. So for this part of today's presentation, I figured I would share a brief overview of how General Conference functions. Then we'll dive into the constitutional amendments that are up for ratification. Walker will share with us an overview of the process for voting on these amendments at annual conference. And we'll talk about the final steps of the ratification process. So I hope that is what you hoped to hear about today in this part of the program. So again, thank you for the invitation to be here. General Conference, comprised of delegates from all over the world, convenes every 4 years, except when there's a pandemic delay. Technically, General Conference is the only body that can set official policy and speak for our denomination. The Book of Discipline calls for the number of delegates to be between 600 and 1,000 people, an equal number of clergy and laity. In 2024, we had 862 delegates from around the world. At General Conference, we worship. In Charlotte, we heard from various bishops and other speakers. We celebrated the consecration of home missioners and deaconesses. We commissioned missionaries. There was an ecumenical service, and we heard an Episcopal address, a laity address, and young people's address, all of which called us into some understanding of our future through those particular perspectives. I often find worship at General Conference to be a microcosm of our worldwide church at its very best, filled with diversity of music, people, and thought. It is often an illustration of God's beloved community as I imagine it. We don't elect bishops at General Conference. That happens at jurisdictional conference, but we do elect judicial council members and other denominational bodies, while also having responsibility to vote on every single piece of legislation that is submitted. So most of our time really is spent dealing with legislation. And there are 3 categories of petitions submitted to General Conference. The first and the biggest category proposes changes to the Book of Discipline, which is the governing document that contains our doctrine, constitution, church law, rules of organization, and procedures. The second type of petition deals with the Book of Resolutions, which contains the denomination's positions on current social issues. Resolutions expire after 8 years unless General Conference readopts them. And guess what? Since that last regular session of General Conference was, 8 years ago, all resolutions were up for a vote this time around. The Book of Resolutions, if you've never seen it, is divided by kind of the categories of our social principles. So it really is an interesting read about where we stand, what we're about as far as social holiness goes. Now, the third type of petition is non-disciplinary, so it wouldn't be something that goes in the Book of Discipline, right away anyway. It's not related to things that are already in there. Those things might be requesting to form a study group or a task force, and their work might ultimately make it into one of our official documents. All the legislation for the 2020-2024 General Conference was printed in what is called the Daily Christian Advocate. These are still available to download for free at resourceumc.org if you want to read through them. But this is book 2, and this is book 3, and this is the GCFA report that we got when we were there, book 4. Every day we got a little more based on what we did the day before. Most of our delegation enjoyed all that online, but I bring this so you get a visual. Any United Methodist layperson or clergy person or any organization of the United Methodist Church is eligible to submit legislation to General Conference. So individual people do, Sunday school classes do, administrative councils do, annual conferences do, and our official boards and agencies do as well. Each petition should deal with one paragraph in the Book of Discipline, so you couldn't just do one petition to change everything in here. You have to divide it up. And let's see. To deal with all that legislation that comes forward, there are 14 legislative committees into which all legislation is assigned. And each delegate is assigned a legislative committee to serve on. That's where we engage in conferencing. For United Methodists, Christian conferencing is understood as a means of God's grace. Wesleyan scholar Andrew Thompson explains that a Wesleyan understanding of conferencing holds that you absolutely must say what you mean and say what needs to be said, and only asks that it be said out of a motivation of love in order to better love those who are engaged in conversation. So when you think about laity and clergy from all around the world coming together to make decisions on behalf of our denomination, the conferencing that happens would ideally be among the finest example of how to discern in community. Of course, sometimes we fall short of those ideals, but it is intended as a way to incorporate many voices and perspectives into the decision-making processes for our denomination, especially when done while honoring the 3 simple rules: to do no harm, to do good, and to attend to the ordinances of God. United Methodists consider conferencing a means of God's grace, and that is certainly what I experienced. I was assigned to the conference's legislative committee, which dealt with a number of the regionalization petitions. I can honestly say that we made a good effort to listen to voices that often tend to be silenced in our culture. Those from the United States were intentional in encouraging our Central Conference delegates to share the impact of pieces of legislation on their settings back home. And we had interpreters in our circles helping us with the conversation. Central Conference delegates did the same for those of us from the United States. And as a result, we were able to make better informed decisions about all the pieces of legislation assigned to us in our conference's committee. After the conversation or conferencing, each legislative committee votes to adopt, reject, or refer each item they have been assigned. If there were fewer than 10 negative or no votes in committee, those items would be placed on what is known as a consent calendar. And the batch of items on the consent calendar was then voted on all at once, while others were sent to all delegates in the plenary session for consideration. So the work of the legislative committees happens during the first week of General Conference. The second week is when plenary sessions are scheduled. That's when all delegates to General Conference are together in one room and debating and voting on all the petitions. With 1,099 valid petitions to make decisions on this time around, we certainly had our work cut out for us. So let's jump into the constitutional amendments before us. The beginning pages of the Book of Discipline contain our Constitution. There's a preamble there. There are sections dealing with general declarations around who we are and what we believe, as well as how we are to be organized. There are sections on episcopal supervision and on the judicial council, as well as a section on what is required to make amendments to the Constitution. Legislation containing amendments to our Constitution must be passed by a 2/3 majority of delegates voting at General Conference. And then they need to be ratified by a 2/3 majority of all the delegates voting in all the annual conferences around the world. So that's a big task. And that's kind of where we are in this moment right now. The only exception to the 2/3 majority for constitutional amendments is that it takes 3/4 of all delegates voting in order to change the Articles of Religion, or our Confession of Faith, which is all about our beliefs, about a triune God, about faith, about sin and free will, the sacraments, among other important things. So you can see that changing these things is meant to take a lot of care and intentionality. Well, let's take a look at what constitutional amendments we will consider. First is legislation around regionalization. The concept of this is not new, but the way it came to be is worth noting. In 2008, an effort was made through General Conference to change the United States to a central conference. But the constitutional amendments did not get ratified that time around. There was another effort in 2016, but that didn't get out of the legislative committee. The efforts to move to regionalization actually date back to 1920. So here we are, 100 years later, and the connectional table worked on regionalization legislation for the 2020 General Conference, as did the Christmas Covenant team, which is a group of Central Conference leaders. Well, the Christmas Covenant was inspired by a vision of a church that connects globally, engages in mission together, and respects contextual ministry, celebrates the diversity of God's creation in its many beautiful expressions, and values mutually empowering relationships in order to strengthen our core mission of evangelism, discipleship, and social witness for the transformation of the world. So in early 2023, with encouragement of the Council of Bishops, the Connectional Table and the Standing Committee on Central Conference Matters created a joint task force on regionalization. The Christmas Covenant team collaborated on this as well. Their legislation became the template, and out of their collaborative work comes the worldwide regionalization legislation that we now have before us for ratification. It was officially submitted by the Standing Conference or Committee on Central Conference Matters. Now, if ratified, the worldwide regionalization legislation, right now we have the United States, which is made up of 5 jurisdictions, and we have central conferences around other parts of the world. So if we ratify regionalization, we will have 9 regional conferences, and so there won't be that difference between the United States and central conferences. We all will be a part of a regional conference. Those 9 regional conferences include East Africa, Mid-Africa, Southern Africa, West Africa. Central and Southern Europe are together, Northern Europe, Germany, Philippines, and the United States. So each region will have authority to adapt portions of the Book of Discipline based on their context and cultures. This will help maximize the effectiveness of their mission and ministry by allowing for more contextual ministries in our guidebook. For example, each region would have the ability to establish a regional Book of Discipline. They might publish a regional hymnal with adapted rituals. They might set standards and other qualifications for clergy and specialized lay ministers. A region must still align with the national laws, and they cannot adjust the articles of religion or the confession of faith, so the main things about our denomination will remain in place as a foundation that we all build from. There has always been some ability for central conferences outside of the United States to adapt portions of the Book of Discipline for their own context. Worldwide regionalization will give the same ability to the United States. This regionalization legislation was adopted by General Conference with 78 to 81% of the votes in favor, which really illustrates how supportive delegates around the world are of this legislation. It's different because the regionalization legislation was divided into like 8 different pieces of legislation that were dealt with, and so different votes had different numbers of affirmation. So anyhow, the most exciting points seem to be how the worldwide regionalization enables each region to contextualize their ministries, and how much more efficient General Conference could be if everyone didn't have to discern and vote on matters that do not pertain to their region. Many hours have been spent at General Conference debating pensions that are not worldwide retirement benefits, or talking about finance and property requirements through the lens of practices and laws here in the United States. So the things that will remain the same are that we will still have a General Conference, we will still have Judicial Council, a Council of Bishops, and general boards and agencies. Those are the things that will connect us across our regions. We will still share one constitution, the same doctrinal standards, articles of religion and confession of faith, our theological task, Christian ministry, and our social principles. These are not adaptable. So that is regionalization. Many of these items up for ratification change the word central conference to regional conference. Other pieces of it enable us to create regionalization within our polity. But believe me, there are many places where just one word changes from central conference to regional conference. And what we'll be doing is making all these technical changes. It will bring about a more equitable structure for our worldwide denomination. All of the worldwide regionalization legislation will be handled under ballot number 1 at our annual conference. So I had mentioned a little bit ago that constitutional amendments need to be ratified by a 2/3 majority of all the delegates voting in all the annual conferences around the world. So that means that every single vote at annual conference will count. Every single vote for and every single vote against. In order to be ratified, all the votes for the legislation are counted up at the end, and they need to be at least 2/3 of the vote collected around the world in favor in order to pass. So I want to invite Walker Bro, our conference secretary, to come forward now to share with you just how we will manage the voting process at annual conference for accuracy and integrity. And there is some consistency to this across all annual conferences so that we do this with great care.
So as Carol said, the ratification of constitutional amendments is 2/3 of the aggregate votes of all of the delegates to all of the annual conferences. So they'll take up all of our votes and add them onto all of the votes in Wisconsin and all of the votes in all of the all of the annual conferences in Germany and every other annual conference around the world, and total them all together, and that's what we need 2/3 of the vote of. And so because of that, every single vote matters. And so we will be voting by ballots. We are doing paper ballots because electronic ballots cost a lot of money, and I don't want to have to deal with technology not working and then having to suddenly realize, oh, hey, we need to do something else. Paper will get the job done, and I'm happy to use it. We will not be announcing the result in Minnesota immediately following the ballots. This is the practice that is being communicated to all annual conferences because it does not matter, in a sense, what each individual annual conference's vote is. Those numbers are being asked not to be released and to protect the integrity of the entire vote. If we know what the voting results are of all of these annual conferences that vote early, that can have an effect on what happens at the annual conferences that vote later. And we don't want to unfairly advantage or disadvantage any annual conference because of when they are going to vote. So at annual conference, you need to be a voting member. Clergy, you have different voting requirements and eligibility that I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's in the Constitution of the Book of Discipline. And so not every clergy person will get to vote on constitutional amendments. However, every layperson who has a vote does get to vote on constitutional amendments. And so some of you might be going as your lay representative from your church. There are also equalization members to account for clergy who aren't appointed to a local church, so people like Carol or our retirees, so that we have an equal voting membership between laity and clergy. In Minnesota, we have not at any point in recent years used up all of our lay equalization spots. So if you have an interest in voting, please talk to your pastor and your conference superintendent about becoming an equalization member so that you can have a voice and a vote in this process to ratify the constitutional amendments. And I think that was all of the points that I was going to hit.
Thank you, Walker. So there's 4 ballots that we're going to have related to constitutional amendments. So let's move forward to the second one. It relates to paragraph 4, article 4 in our Constitution, which is entitled Inclusiveness of the Church. This article in our Constitution says that we are part of the Church Universal, which is one body in Christ. The United Methodist Church acknowledges that all persons are of sacred worth. And then that paragraph continues saying, all persons without regard to race, color, national origin, status, or economic conditions shall be eligible to attend its worship services, participate in its programs, receive the sacraments, upon baptism be admitted as baptized members, and upon taking vows declaring the Christian faith, become professing members in any local church in the connection. In the United Methodist Church, no conference or other organizational unit of the church shall be structured so as to exclude any member or any constituent body of the church because of race, color, national origin, status, or economic condition. So that might have been a lot to read and hear at one time. But it basically lists all the factors we will not discriminate against. No matter what race, color, national origin, status, or economic condition, all persons shall be eligible to attend its worship service and participate in its programs. At first glance, there doesn't seem to be anything missing. Yet upon closer review, there is a gap. Did you recognize? What's missing? Gender? Orientation? Yeah. Well, here's what is proposed. The constitutional amendment would add gender and ability to this list. It would go in between race and color. So if ratified, our Constitution will say that all persons, without regard to race, gender, ability, color, national origin, status, or economic condition, shall be eligible to attend its worship services and participate in its programs, receive sacraments, and be admitted as baptized members. Delegates voted 607 for and 67 against, which is a 90% margin, wider actually than most of the worldwide regionalization. This legislation was submitted by the General Commission on the Status and Role of Women, or COSRO. COSRO was started in 1972 to address discrimination against women at all levels of the church, both laity and clergy. There was an effort to add gender to the list in 2016, not that long ago, but it received only 61% of the votes for ratification. So that whole worldwide process, counting every vote that Walker described, it came in with 61%. COSRO is more optimistic about its passing this time around, as it sees a way to ensure that all persons have a place in the United Methodist Church. So the addition of gender and ability to our inclusive statement in paragraph 4, article 4 of our Constitution is the second ballot, the second constitutional amendment ballot we will tend to for ratification. The third ballot is about paragraph 5, article 5 of the Constitution. It is entitled Racial Justice. This legislation was submitted by the General Commission on Religion and Race, or GCOR, and actually changes the content of the original paragraph quite a bit. But as we know, our cultural acknowledgement of racial injustices has perhaps changed at a more rapid pace in the last few years also. It's easiest to see the change when they are listed side by side, but a screen doesn't really give enough space to do that. So here is the original, what's in the Book of Discipline now. The United Methodist Church proclaims the value of each person as a unique child of God and commits itself to the healing and wholeness of all persons. The United Methodist Church recognizes that the sin of racism has been destructive to its unity throughout its history. Racism continues to cause painful division and marginalization. The United Methodist Church shall confront and seek to eliminate racism, whether in organizations or in individuals, in every facet of its life and in society at large. The United Methodist Church shall work collaboratively with others to address concerns that threaten the cause of racial justice at all times and in all places. That is already printed in our Book of Discipline in our Constitution. But there's a new suggestion that we'll have before us. What is proposed is that the United Methodist Church proclaims that from God's goodness and love, God created all persons as God's unique and beloved children. Racism opposes God's law, goodness and love, and diminishes the image of God in each person. Fueled by white privilege, white supremacy, and colonialism, the sin of racism has been a destructive scourge on global society and throughout the history of the United Methodist Church. It continues to destroy our communities, harm persons, obstruct unity, and undermine God's work in this world. Racism must be eradicated. Therefore, the United Methodist Church commits to confronting and eliminating all forms of racism, racial inequity, colonialism, white privilege, and white supremacy in every facet of its life and in society at large. So GCOR would say that this is a pivotal framework for the United Methodist Church's commitment to addressing and eliminating racism in all its forms. In addition to being our conference secretary, Walker Bro serves as a member of the General Commission on Religion and Race. So what a blessing it would be to hear from him on what GCOR might be saying about this legislation as it comes before us for ratification.
So for the record, I was elected to GCOR July of last year, so I was not involved and cannot take credit for any of this. I can only talk about why we think it's important. So this is a big shift, cultural shift in the language we use to talk about racism and inclusion here. And it's not just about words on a page. It's about Imago Dei, Imago Dei, as we see in our community, both in the church and in society at large. It is a shift from passive to active. There is an active role we need to take in fighting against racism and dismantling white supremacy. It acknowledges our past, our present, and looks to the future of where we can go. And it calls both our role within the church of addressing the racism that has existed and continues to exist within our denomination, as well as to society at large, and our role to be a voice and witness there. GCOR has put out a bunch of resources about this constitutional amendment, which are available on its website in the 4 official languages of the General Conference, as well as Spanish and Korean, if any of you are fluent in those as well.
Thank you, Walker. So our 4th ballot and the final constitutional amendment that we will have before us relates to paragraph 36, Article 4, which is about voting rights in the election for General Conference clergy delegates. Local pastors have authority to vote for clergy delegates to general and jurisdictional conferences. This legislation brings clarity on what educational requirements are needed in order for them to have a vote for that. You still have to be a clergy member in full communion to be a delegate to general or jurisdictional conference, but we do have a number of clergy folks that wouldn't be eligible to be elected, but do have a voice in the vote. So this particular legislation specifies that licensed local pastors must have completed their course of study or earned a Master of Divinity from a University Senate-approved seminary as recognized in a central or regional conference before they can vote to elect clergy delegates to General Conference. They must also have served a minimum of 2 consecutive years under appointment immediately before the election. So you can see the new words are in yellow, the old words are in white, and so it really seeks to clarify what educational requirements are needed in order to have that vote. This legislation was submitted by the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry, and it was adopted by a margin of 547 to 99, or 85% in favor. So when will we finally hear the results for these ratifications? We won't know the final outcome until all 127 annual conferences worldwide meet. And so once the last conference concludes, the Council of Bishops will certify all of the results that were submitted to them, and then the outcome of this lengthy ratification process will be known by us all. We are expecting this to happen in November of 2025. So I know that there's quite a lot of information to digest, and I'm happy to answer any questions. We do have several members of our delegation here as well. So I'm just going to invite you to stand up real quick so that people will see who else is on the delegation with me from Minnesota. So we have Jeff Ozan, Walker Bro, Becky Boland, and Dave Knuckles. Wave, yeah, there we go. So if you have any questions about our experience or, just something you're curious about, don't hesitate to seek us out. But I think we have a moment for questions and answers now, if you would like.
Been to a meeting like this before. It's pretty cool. So my question comes from a place of total ignorance, but when we're adding gender and ability, where's sexual orientation?
Yeah, I think that, and I'm just speaking not in an official capacity, but I do believe that there was such a focus on eliminating the discriminatory language in our Book of Discipline that it was a strategic move, perhaps this time around, not to include it at the risk of removing all of the discriminatory language.
Your first two slides, the one that talked about gender and race, there was a word called status. Is status defined? And if so, what does that mean?
Yeah, it's not clearly defined, but some proponents might say that that's, can be related. What is your status? But I think it's initially, if I thought about when it was probably written, a little bit more economic status related. Or, I would guess when that was put in, there wasn't great thought about it being immigration status. But status is status, and it can be interpreted until it's defined. That's what I say.
Hi, Carol. Sharon Fields, Hamlin. I guess I would, as we're talking about this list, wouldn't it just be easier to define all as all and then get rid of the language behind it?
It could be. I'll just take that as a observation. But yet, just me speaking, Sharon, we still live in times where there are clear differences in compensation, in rights and privileges for categories of people. And so until we live into a living into all, sometimes the naming has power in places especially that aren't very equitable.
I don't know if this is the right time for the question, so please tell me if it needs to be later. But I'm interested in churches that define themselves as reconciling. Now that we have this new proposed legislation, what exactly does it mean to be reconciling? And I started being interested in this when I was in Iowa City, and there was quite a range of difference of churches that would put out the reconciling symbol and the rainbow flag, but some would not sanction same-sex marriages, some would. And it was quite an arc. And now that the discriminatory language and the language about charging clergy has been removed, is there any kind of effort within the reconciling movement to make sure that when we put that rainbow flag out, when we put that symbol out, that we really are reconciling so that people aren't being harmed? I think there was in other words, you are ministered to in all of the ways of the church. And I think there was an article written by somebody at New City not that long ago in the Star Tribune that addressed this too, and her recommendation was make sure you talk to the pastor the first day you walk into the church, because rainbow might not mean rainbow. So has anybody talked about that within the reconciling movement?
Thank you, Lee, for your question. That is an absolutely perfect segue into Becky Boland's presentation. So I'm going to take that as my cue to pack up my props, and we can hear from Becky. And then if any other questions come to mind at the very end of our program, I'll still be here. So, and this is now on. It wasn't perfect on for me, so I think it should work.
Friends, I don't think anyone does a better job of explaining General Conference than Carol Zaagsma. That's a skill, friends. Not many people can do that. My name is Becky Boland. I have the honor of attending Hamlin Church in St. Paul A bunch of us are here today, so it's nice to see us all here. Hamlin's been a reconciling church for quite a while, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. I also am one of our conference co-lay leaders, but the reason I was asked to be here today is I serve on our general conference delegation as a lay delegate. John asked earlier how he should introduce me, and I said, you should just say my name is Becky. But something that I feel really strongly about and will come through as you get to know me and hear about my passion for inclusive ministry is I'm a certified lay minister. And what that means is I'm a person who intentionally chose to be lay people. I have many clergy friends. I adore them and love them, but I'm not called to be clergy. I feel called to be a lay person to partner with our clergy to lead our churches. So I was asked today to talk about what it means to live out our mission as reconciling congregations. And I struggled with this a little bit. Carol first emailed me, and I kind of thought, I'm really not an expert on this. There are so many people in Minnesota that have been doing this a lot longer than I have. I came to this conversation in 2012, 2016, because I had a daughter who was 6 years old in 2016, and asking me why the church that we loved, that we were active in, was still having this conversation about how all were not welcome. And it was a really hard question to answer. And those of you that have been around little people, or our parents or grandparents or mentors or teachers, you know what it's like to answer those questions, right? And I had a really fascinating conversation with my pastor at the time, Judy Zabel. We used to go to Hennepin Church. And it was an hour and a half after worship where I argued with her about it. And so finally she handed me her book of discipline and said, go read this book. And I did. I don't recommend it, by the way. It's not meant for reading, it's meant for referencing. But it gave me an understanding of how the United Methodist Church got to where we were at that point in 2016. And it also gave me an understanding of my view of who we are called to be by God, to be the church that God wants us to be, which is that church where everyone is a beloved child of God, as are all of you, uniquely as you are. That should not be a question. But yet, until 2024, it was a question in our church. So as I was preparing today, I wanted to take a moment and pause and just acknowledge all the work that has been done, all the effort that Carol and Dave and others have put into the success of General Conference 2024. And I want to honor the work that's been in this room and done by countless others. If we can all just pause for a moment and think of the people that we know in our ministry context that have led on this work for decades. For me, a lot of it's Dave Knuckles, right? I mean, Dave joined our delegation in 2012, was on it in 2016, was on the never-ending delegation of 2020, and Walker and I were sitting here before we started. Sorry, my daughter's texting me asking if she can order Chipotle. She's wonderful in that she asked me if she can use my debit card before she does, but not always convenient. So, yeah, it's a two-way street. But Walker and I were sitting there trying to remember when Dave became involved in this work, and we Googled, and I'm going to embarrass Dave, and there was a picture of Dave in 2012 when he joined the delegation, and he looked a lot younger. Fair enough. Anyway, so when I think of the countless people, like in our conference who have led this work, I want to acknowledge the work that they've done so we can get to the place that we are, where we can think about what we are next as a church. And then I did some research on what it means to be a reconciling congregation, even though I've belonged to one for the vast majority of my adult life, and we have many of them in Minnesota. And ultimately, what it comes down to is a church that embraces and works for the full participation of all people, including LGBTQ+ individuals, within its congregational life and within the denomination. And the National Reconciling Ministries Network, is everyone familiar with the National Reconciling Ministries Network? If you're not, I recommend you take a look at their website. They've reformatted themselves post-General Conference 2024. They have a strategic plan for 2025 through 2028, which they call, because they're young, much hipper and cooler and younger than I am, they call it #2528. Very cool, very hip. But when I was taking a look at where we are headed next and how we can live into being that inclusive church that God has called us to be, something that they were talking about really resonated, which is, and I'm going to read it. I don't like reading PowerPoints, I'm going to do it. But responding with love and authority to general conference decisions is a whole other matter. And so that really sums up well where we are as Reconciling Ministry, what we have left to do as work as a church, to be the church that God called us to be, and what we as individuals here in the Minnesota Annual Conference can do to lead into that work. So theologically, I love being a Methodist. I'm a super huge fan of Methodism. And part of that for me is the 3 general rules of Methodism, or the 3 simple rules. And every time I'm faced where I'm trying to think through something in my faith or navigate something theologically, I always go back to the 3 general rules. So today, as I talk about steps we can take in Minnesota to move forward reconciling congregations, I've done it within these 3 general rules. First, do no harm. We, for quite some time, and I say this as a straight white woman, but to acknowledge the harm that we have done as a church to individuals who we have not fully welcomed. And part of that is a culture of complacency or assumption. Part of it's having a big tent over an inclusive welcome, and that continued allowing of silence. And as opposed to that doing good, that second general rule about who we can be as church. When I think about doing good, it's the things that we all know intrinsically, right? It's why we're already in this room on a beautiful Saturday morning. It's offering authentic welcome as everyone being beloved children of God. It's the outreach, affirmation, and intersectionality in ministry with LGBTQ plus persons. But it's also, and I want to pause here for a moment, taking the time to have dialogue with those who are seeking to be inclusive and just. And I think that's really important. I have been in a many-year, almost 6-year dialogue with a pastor in Minnesota who I don't really agree with much theologically. I haven't found a lot of common ground. The common ground we have is that we were raised in a similar part of the state. We grew up around a lot of the same people, but theologically, while we're both United Methodists, we are in very, very different worlds. And I was reading through our text conversations, mostly via text recently, and I felt frustrated by some of the feelings this person shared and some of the ways that they were looking at ministry. And then I realized that as they read through those text messages, they probably felt the same way about me. And I do think there's a lot to be said as we think about what it means to live into this next phase of United Methodism and having conversations with individuals who disagree with us, who have a different perspective, but also who are seeking to be inclusive and just. The first time I introduced myself with my pronouns was in 2019 at Church of the Resurrection. I had never done it before. I didn't know what I was doing. I was super confused. I made an assumption about what my pronouns were, but no one had explained it to me. I Googled afterwards and realized I'd guessed right. But my point is, we are all on our journey. And just because somebody does not have the same place in our journey as where we were at personally, doesn't mean we can't continue to have the conversation. So, number one is really encouraging and engaging in that dialogue with those that would like to be inclusive and just and are looking for that next phase of who we are. There's also a national movement in the United States, which I find really interesting, to have a conference-wide leadership team called the LGBTQ plus ministry team. And the goal behind doing that formally in your conference is A, to acknowledge the work that needs to be done around this ministry, and also, alongside of that, B, intentionally work toward it. I checked with Walker, because Walker knows all the magical things, because his name is Walker. We don't have this legislation in Minnesota, but it's something for us to consider as we look forward into what we want to do next. But there are 3 conferences out there so far that have already adopted this legislation last year and have these ministry teams that are functional, and it'd be something for us to look at here in Minnesota to see if it is the right fit for our conference. The last piece I wanted to mention under doing good is, and I put some really pretty screenshots in here, but have all of you been to the Reconciling Ministries Network website? So if you've been there and you've taken some time to dig around, there are some phenomenal resources about how to have these conversations and how congregations can live into, to your question, what it means to be reconciling. And one of them is this free resource on building an inclusive church, which I couldn't quite read it up there because I'm getting old, but it's a welcoming toolkit. It's their 3.0 version. And my point in saying this is a lot of times I get emails from lay people around the state asking what they can do to live into inclusive ministry or to think about how to help their church think about being reconciling or inclusive. And the biggest thing you can do is go to the website, find the right study guide for all of you, and have a small group and begin to have these conversations about what it means. So this building an inclusive church, I checked around with several churches around the country that had done it. They all said it worked exceptionally well. They all had adapted it to their own means. I talked to someone in Florida, someone in North Carolina, someone in Montana, ironically enough, and then some in the North Central jurisdiction. And everyone I talked to, whether it was a ministry that was already reconciling or a church that was thinking about becoming reconciling, had a good experience with this toolkit. The next is the Into the Wilderness, which is the Reconciling Lenten devotional. Reconciling, I know we're already almost to Easter, yay. But this devotional was written for a time during Lent, and it was something that could be used in years to come. But the entire purpose around this devotional as a resource is to think through what reconciliation looks as you go through the process of Lent. And it does a really phenomenal job of, again, acknowledging the harm that the church has done, but also how we can move forward into what's next, considering that we have, as Carol mentioned, moved past this part of our church and into that part of what's next. And then the third, and for those of you that haven't been there, is the Reconciling Ministry Network's resource library. Here's the really cool thing about this. You go to that little drop box there on the bottom of the screen, and you put your role in, and it gives you, I found 75 different options of different ministries and different toolkits and resources that were available, one of which is a Vacation Bible School. Isn't that awesome? There's Vacation Bible School, friends, now that's inclusive. It's amazing curricula. Any churches here do that last year? I know. See, Walker and I go to the same church, so I will acknowledge I was kind of setting him up there. But Hamlin did it last year and I had a great experience with the curricula. But the resource library is, again, a really great spot, whether you're clergy or lay, but if you'd like to begin to have these conversations in your churches or would like to move your church forward into what is next, they are phenomenal resources that are there to be used. So the last of the 3 general rules, Carol said it the right way, attending to the ordinances. How we say it at my house when we pray at night is, how are we staying in love with God? And I want to pause here for a moment because we ask ourselves this every night at my house, my husband, my 15-year-old daughter, and I. And we've done it for the last 6 or 7 years. Every night before we go to bed, we do our daily devotionals, and we talk about if we've done any harm, how we're doing good, and how we're staying in love with God. And my daughter's now 15, and if any of you know my daughter Elsa or have heard me talk about her over the years, she's a little sassy. I don't know where she gets it from. I saw the look Pam was giving me. Yeah. But my favorite thing about her, not necessarily to parent, but as an individual, is she's the most strong-willed and independent woman I know. And we encourage that at my house because I think she needs to be strong-willed and independent to do what she needs to do. And I see a lot of you, especially women, nodding in the congregation. But the other night when I asked her how she was intentionally staying in love with God in a time where it's a difficult time to live out our faith in an exceptional way. It's a difficult time to get up and maybe know the right steps to take to make a difference in the world that we're at today. And just like a 15-year-old does, she tossed her long red hair, right? Like, I cannot believe you're asking me this. And did that little eye roll that teenagers do where you think their eyes are not going to come back down. And then she's like, duh, Mom, it's talking about my faith every single day. And she said, Mom, my friends know they can come to our house and first of all get a mama snack tray, which is what I call the snacks I make after school. But second of all, she said, every time before they leave, you tell them they're beloved children of God. So my daughter said the way that in part that she's staying in love with God is to talk about it, acknowledge it, and remind people that they are beloved children of God. It's the beauty of Methodism, right? We welcome all as beloved children of God. We are a church of connection. One of my favorite things about Bishop Lynette's leadership is how she's bringing us to intentional connectionalism, or at least that's my perception from the inside, from the outside looking in. We are focusing on the Book of Discipline. We're talking about what it means to be a part of G-Corps. We're doing all of the things to help us make sure that we understand that as United Methodists, that means being a part of a worldwide connection. It's not being on an island here in Minnesota. We're a church of curiosity. Isn't curiosity amazing? My faith is not the same as it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. And if it is, I'm failing. Church of invitation. I invited a family recently to come and try my church at Hamlin. She's a colleague who told me that I work for the state of Minnesota. And she said, you know, Becky, I'm looking for a church. And I was like, oh, I can help you with that. Totally got this. And I was like, do you have a, opinion on faith? And she said, I've tried the Catholic Church 6 times now. And she said, but they won't accept my wife and I. And I said, well, let me tell you what. So my point in saying this is the most beautiful thing that we can do that is hard for us to do as Minnesotans and as predominantly white people is invite people to join us at church. We're a church of relationship. It was a beautiful, lovely thing to come in here today and to pause in the entryway and to think about the last time I had been in this church, in this building, which was the spring of 2019, when I don't remember how many people, Judy or someone else could tell us, gathered around a potluck to talk about what had happened in St. Louis in February and to intentionally plan about what we were going to do next. And my favorite thing about walking back into this building, in this sanctuary today, is to think about the relationships we built in those conversations and how far we've come, and that a lot of those same people are sitting here in that room today. It doesn't mean we can't invite others, but it's important to acknowledge and emphasize that we as United Methodists are a church of deep relationship. As I close, again, I quote Reconciling Ministries Network in their 25-28 strategic plan. Staying in love with God and following these 3 general rules of doing no harm, doing good, and staying in love with God is an invitation to explore God's inclusive love and how we live out our life in ministry. Thank you. Any questions? I think for Carol or myself or any of the delegation. Dave Knuckles.
Is there a donation link on that party?
There is. This is funny because prior to this, Dave and I were talking about Reconciling Ministries, as a former board member, Dave is, and we were talking about we should do something in Minnesota to help contribute to the National Reconciling Ministries initiative because they are reformatting themselves and it's expensive to do that and they are running out of funds. So yes, there is a donation on the Reconciling Ministries Network's page. I actually made one myself this morning because I kind of feel like when I go and use someone's resources, I should give them money as a thank you for using their resources. I will tell you it is on the upper right-hand side of their page, which is where I found it this morning.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes?
This one is really for Carol.
Yeah.
Are those slides going to be available on the MRC website, or?
I can offer the slides for distribution, yeah. I wondered if I could just offer a couple of remarks to Lee's question. Yeah, Walker.
On Resource UMC, there's also a number of different resources about the regionalization piece in particular, a longer PowerPoint presentation and a one-pager that could be given out as a flyer or something.
Is that resourceumc.org?
Yes.
Thank you.
Or if you Google regionalization, UMC, it'll probably comes up. Because I've looked at that a few times in the past few days.
Had some difficulty navigating the website, so thank you.
The one-page handout is really excellent. I have one copy here today, so if you want to look at it to see if you want to go search for it, then I'll show it to you. So I know sometimes when you prepare a presentation, you know, a lot of what Becky shared is a good response to Lee's question, and yet I also think there's some direct response that I just have in my heart to share as food for thought. So I'm not answering in any official capacity other than, I guess, a queer clergy person in this conference. So, and a person in some conversations. And we are in, when we talk about 3 simple rules, to do no harm, to do good, and to attend to the ordinances of God, sometimes how you accomplish those things looks different. And we're in a climate where it may look different what do no harm looks like, what do good looks like. 5 years ago, do good would look like flying pride flag loud and high out in the front for the whole neighborhood to see. Today's climate may be put a pink triangle sticker on the door or the full pride, indications on the door so that it's less of a target. And I'm sure you have some feelings hearing me say that. I have feelings saying it myself. But this is one of our tasks as we try to live in a way that does no harm, that does good, that stays in love with God, that we need to be mindful of how to help each other be safe too. And so I don't know that there's global wisdom to answer your question right now. And I can also share with you that we have had immigrant ministries popping up in very inclusive congregations. And so the host congregation is Reconciling and flies a flag. And the immigrant congregation is having a hard time reaching the neighbors in their neighborhood because they won't walk past the flag. So that's a very real conversation and a very real dynamic about just the truth of both of those things. The LGBTQ community is, pride is such a deep piece of identity and being, because it was born out of just being visible, and the closet and all of that kind of truth. And yet these are the very real conversations that are happening around our conference too. We aren't at a place yet where, even though the Book of Discipline has removed all the restrictive language, we don't have congregations calling us up and saying, hey, we're ready for you to appoint the next LGBTQ pastor for us. We still have gender comments in clergy appointments, and we continue to work through that. So not okay, not acceptable, and yet that's also a truth and a reality that we have found it more effective to have relationship building and those conversations directly than making an expectation. I also know there's a number of reconciling congregations that did the thing 10 or 20 years ago, and there'll be people in the inner workings of that congregation that say, yeah, that doesn't mean a thing to most of the people that sit in the pews on Sunday morning. So there isn't one answer for the beautiful and valid and deep question that you asked. So a lot of the studies that Becky elevated, I think, will help in a situation where you did the thing 10 or 20 years ago, but it doesn't really mean anything now. That would be a good answer to that. So it just kind of depends on, it's a journey, and where's everybody at in it. So that's just my response. And I don't know if you want the microphone back or we can go to coffee, but.
I heard your response, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, so not to follow up Carol's point about vote becoming reconciling 10 years ago and not doing anything since, but I would like to recognize the anniversaries for some of our churches. This is not necessarily putting you in that box. This is just the number of years, nothing about where you're at now. So 5 years ago, Detroit Lakes, Bethel UMC, the Recovery Church, and Hamlin University all officially became reconciling. Ten years ago, Centennial UMC in Roseville and St. Anthony Park became reconciling. 15 years ago, Minnetonka became reconciling. 20 years ago, Spirit of Hope became reconciling. And 35 years ago, Prospect Park became reconciling. They are our second longest time as reconciling of churches that are still open in Minnesota. So thank you to all of those churches for the witness that you've had these past years, and all of the other churches who aren't on that list, but at a different year, we look forward to recognizing you in those anniversary years as well. Someone had their hand raised. Did you want to say something?
Well, my understanding is this is 30 years for Good Samaritan this year as well.
My apologies for missing you on my quick look at the spreadsheet before I stood up here.
I hope I have the time.
Well, thank you all for coming. We learned so much. Thank you. Where did Becky go? There she is. Thank you. Thank you, Carol. So much to digest. So thank you for the tech people. I hope we were online, streamed the whole time. Boy, that is a plus for this church. Last Sunday, they were setting up. We have 10:30 service or 10 o'clock service. At 9:30, they got to 1% out Zoom. We're having issues, but they're resolved. So I got a thumbs up, so yay. All right. I would ask at this time, where's Pastor Linda?
Right here.
Come on.
Sitting in a place I never get to sit.
Thank you so much for coming today. I hope you had enough to eat. It's a Methodist potluck. Come on. And had good conversations. It's great to see everybody. And wherever we are next year, about this time, I hope you can join the group and invite your congregations to become part of it, because I think, as you saw today, there's so much to be learned at all of our spring gatherings with the speakers we have and so on. And it's a great time to connect and reconnect. So with that,
Thank you to the speakers, really, truly. And thank you for everybody coming today. Please remember to take your food with you.
because I think we have like 100 egg rolls to eat tomorrow, so. If you would, in a spirit of prayer. God, we thank you that we have do no harm, do good, and stay in love with God as our guides as United Methodists. That we want all to mean all in all of our churches, and that journey sometimes takes a little longer. Be with those here today and those who are with us in spirit, to know your peace, your hope, and the goodness that we all have for us, especially during this Lenten season. And bless the people who put today together. Amen.